I'm Jay Quatrini. I'm a partner at a law firm called Davenport Lyons. Davenport Lyons has been around since the 1930s. It's a old school British law firm, funny enough, based in London's West End. Sam Lyons, one of our founding partners, although he wasn't alive in the 1930s, but the evolution of the firm was one of the original music lawyers in Britain back in the 60s. So, of course, when music was all coming out of Britain, and I think Sam's clients were Pink Floyd and some of the Rolling Stones and people like that. So the practice goes back to those days. We have, of course, a New York office, which is where we are today, as you can see by the lovely view back here. And I divide my time on a 2-weekly basis between New York and London. I go 2 weeks New York, 2 weeks London, back and forth. The only music lawyer on the planet, I believe, who has an active practice in Europe and America. Most firms have relationships with other firms and know people, but we're actively, through my insane travel schedule, actively between, I'm using the word actively a lot here, but both territories. Why that's valuable is when you have artists who succeed on a worldwide basis. It's important for American artists, for example, to have access to the European market, to understand, whatever tax treaties may affect their touring income, to have relationships with their label affiliates in the major territories in Europe, which typically are England, France, Germany. Then the others follow. Italy, Spain are lesser territories, depending on the type of music. Holland, surprisingly, is a pretty big record buying territory. And when you talk about European artists, every European artist, of course, wants to break in America because we are the biggest worldwide market. I think the U.S. has 50% market share, followed by England, which has, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but there's something like 12%. Japan has 12%, and then you start going down 8, and then you're little bits and pieces there. So my practice is, again, a worldwide international practice, which is unique. My career started very haphazardly. I wish I had a wonderful business plan story to tell you, but life just happens, and here's how it happened for me. My mother's a school teacher, and a colleague of hers, friend, was the senior vice president at a big sports agency in Boston, and said, Jay, you should go and meet so-and-so and see the office. And I went and saw the office. The law firm was called Bob Wolf and Associates. At the time, Bob was the biggest sports agent before IMG and all these other ProServe and these companies. They were around, but we were the biggest. Bob was the biggest one. And the woman who I met with, whose name was Jill, happened to be needing an assistant. Jill's job was doing all the merchandising deals. This was before Michael Jordan, before Tiger Woods. It was, their biggest client was Larry Bird at the time, and they had just signed Doug Flutie. So Jill called me up a couple days later. I had just gone to see the office and said, hey, we had a good time meeting. Would you like to work for me? So when I got it back up off the floor, I said, of course I would love to work for you. Who wouldn't? It was probably the most sought-after job in the entire city of Boston, and the best sports. It was a dream. And Jill was a wonderful person, as was Bob. Bob was the kind of guy who was on the Tonight Show like 3 times, as himself, because he was a celebrity. So I cut my teeth in the entertainment business by doing merchandising deals, and the market was just really happening, and sometimes we would just make up numbers because we didn't know what stuff was worth, so we just named a really big number and come as close as we could. Other times we knew exactly what things were. And while I was there, we got Joe Montana as a client, and I was given Joe as to look after, because it was just Jill and I who did it. She had Larry, Doug, Vinny Testaverde was there. We had a massive client base. So I talked to Joe 5 times a day for 3 years and did every single one of his deals. Of course, being supervised by Jill and Bob, but nevertheless, I was the main person. So I learned how to do that, and that was kind of where I first learned. Of course, that's not music, that's sport. What ended up happening was I decided to move to New York, and But I thought, enough of Boston. I needed to move on to bigger and better things. Came here and started a firm with a friend of mine, and we were able to get a whole bunch of fashion models as clients, and we represented Tyra Banks and Roshumba and a lot of the early 90s very, very big models, back when everybody used to pronounce Tyra's name Tira. So we had it always known as Tyra. But so we did all those early deals, and we just really built up a client base. My first ever music deal was Izzy Stradlin from Guns N' Roses, our cameraman's friend over here. And I was asked to represent a reggae artist named Mikey Dread, who was doing a duet with Izzy Stradlin. And I said, sure, I can do that. I never did a music deal in my life. So I got out some books and got out and basically I just questioned everything in the contract, drove the other lawyer nuts, ended up making a really good deal because I said no to everything because I was afraid. But of course I learned. I did my homework and had enough colleagues that I could call that were, that I had met. And from there, kidding aside, I worked very hard to develop a client practice, and it was the beginning of hip hop. The real beginning, but it was the beginning of the big New York kind of hip hop thing with Wu-Tang Clan and Bad Boy Records and all that kind of stuff. And I had would get a client here and there, and people would talk, and my practice grew. And everybody thinks they want to be an entertainment lawyer. Every law student, and those of you saying, I don't want to be, you're smart. It's very sexy sounding, it's exciting sounding, and it's a great job. Let's face it. There are, it's fun stuff, but it's hard work. There's very few of us really who do it in the bar. If you took all the lawyers in the country and put you all, of course, a lot of people let them drop a bomb in that room, but and you took the ones who were proper entertainment lawyers, it'd be a very small percentage. Now, I don't know, maybe for all I know, it's way more than I think, but my impression is it's a very small. There's only, I probably know every record lawyer there is to know in this country, and I've been doing it for long enough. I should, but there's not that many. Could a corporate lawyer say never a corporate lawyer, or a divorce lawyer I never divorce? Of course not. You probably don't even know a divorce lawyer in New York City. Forget, let alone the country. So there's not that many. It's very hard to really get into it. So practice development is very competitive. Certainly, with the shrinkage in the market this year, the record business is down 10%. Although last quarter was up, we're still overall down 10%. We'll see. Maybe Christmas will be good because of who knows why. The iPod is wonderful, but now it's back to a singles market. So people aren't buying albums, buying singles. So, you have shrinkage of the market from a sales point of view. There used to be 6 major labels, and there was 5. Now there's 4. And if Warner and EMI merge, there'll be 3. Guess what? Less record deals. So, to get yourself, clients is very, very competitive. So how do you do it? You basically get out there. You have to be involved with, all the organizations that surround the music business, the T.J. Martell Foundation. You just need to know executives. Basically, what I do is I go to lunch and dinner, every single day of my life with somebody in the record business, and I have to be on top of knowing what's going on. Between here and London, I know all the executives. I do have that other side of things. And, I get referred a lot of work, and, it's just, there is, although my law firm is a 100-lawyer firm, and I'm one of the 30 partners, music marketing, and we have a marketing department. I drive them all nuts. I'm like, you can't market for music. I have to, it's me hanging out at 2 a.m. with friends of mine. That's marketing. Kidding aside, obviously, we have a nice reputation. You need to have successes. And it's a relationship business. It really is one of those, there's cliches out there. My response to why things are cliches is because they've been true for a long time. So cliche sounds like it's a bad word, but it means that there's some truth out there that's somewhat universal. And it is a relationship business. If I were to just walk in off the street today for the first time, and let's say somehow I was able to genetically implant all this information in my head, but I knew nobody, well, I wouldn't have any clients, and that would take me years to get something, because why would anybody hire me? even though I knew exactly what I'm sitting here knowing. So, you need to get the trust of people, and and you're dealing with the same people over and over and over again. So, you want to. It's very easy to make enemies. I do my best to make friends, but client development is word of mouth. It is, doing panels. It is doing, even stuff like this, and just getting out there. I mean, there's really no magic formula, and there's no, training program to go on. When I first started doing it in the early '90s, I guess '91, my marketing was going to CBGBs every night, and my marketing budget was how much beer money I had. Basically, that's what it was. And you heard a band that you liked, you tried to schmooze them up. Who's the manager? Try to get the demo tape, take it to a label, try to get a record deal. I mean, that was that was it.
And has that changed a lot?
No. It's changed a lot. Marketing has changed. Well, let me just say this. It's changed to the extent that my personal practice is more urban music based than rock based. And that's more a product of the market. I mean, urban music 2 years ago, I think there's a Time magazine front cover issue, overtook country music as the world's biggest genre. Country being second, rock being a distant third. I grew up loving rock and roll music, and that's who I am as a fan. But urban music is where it's at from a business point of view. Now I love urban music because all my friends are in it, so of course I love it. But it is a little different because it's not going to CBGBs. It's not going to some showcase. It really isn't that anymore. I mean, that's not how urban breaks. By the time stuff gets to me, they've already done their street marketing. They've done their demo tapes. They've been on a mixtape here. They've already talked to some executive. They have a friend who produced for Jay-Z or whoever, and they've gotten some traction. Now they have something that they feel, okay, I need to get this to a high level. That's when I get calls. Hey Jay, we heard of you, so and so. You represent Slick Rick. Slick Rick said you're great, or Black Rob said this, or Sean Paul told me that, or blah 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 blah, and you're the guy we want. One thing that's interesting in having the type of practice that I have, which is again not the ordinary music lawyer practice, is that you run into different rights issues. A record deal's a record deal in many respects. A producer contract is a producer contract. A publishing contract is a publishing contract. So it's not necessarily as dramatically different from the basic deal point of view. So I wouldn't want to mislead anybody watching this tape and saying, my gosh, I could never do a British contract because I don't know British law. Well, there are certain things that you need to know. For example, American record contracts are typically 6, 7, 8 album deals. In England, there's rules called restraint of trade where you could never have an 8 album deal. A court would throw it out. So that is a distinction that, that's just knowing you can't have it that long. It doesn't mean that the entire structure of the deal is different. There's just certain little limits certain big limits, as the case may be, that might apply in one territory versus another. There are also the major difference that you have European lawyers having a hard time with and American lawyers not understanding is the way that the mechanical royalty payments are made. Now, in the record business, it's a very complicated set of royalty payouts. There's 2 separate streams of income. There's the income that you share in when the record sells. So if you bought a record at Tower Records, or if you didn't steal it off Lion Children, if you bought a record for $14.98, the artist gets a percentage of that price. Okay, that's what everybody thinks of as the record royalty. There's another royalty called what we call mechanical royalty, and that is payable to the songwriters. So, for example, if I were to do a Beatles cover album with my acoustic guitar, with my horrible singing voice, and sell it at Tower Records for $12, and people were to buy it, I would get the percentage of that $12.98 because it's my recording. I sold it. You're buying my version of that song. However, Lennon and McCartney, are getting paid the mechanical royalties because it's their songs, not my songs. I'm singing somebody else's songs. So that's the music publishing, and that's what we call mechanical royalties, which goes back to the old when they used to actually mechanically, press the records, and that was the right to mechanically reproduce sound recordings, and that's where that word came from. But for example, in Europe, there are collection societies on a country-by-country basis who collect the mechanical royalties from record companies, and they set the mechanical royalty rate as a percentage of the retail price. And the local collection society will collect on behalf of the writers and then pay it out and so forth. Whereas in America, Congress every 2 years, because America loves bureaucracy, changes the mechanical royalty rate. It's on a different, completely different calculation basis. There is no cap unless you negotiate one in the record deal, and there is, although there are similar societies here that collect, there's not a legal requirement to use those societies. So you have a completely different set of rules governing a very fundamental and very important part of the revenue stream of selling records. To re-explain the concept of how the mechanical royalties are figured, for example, in England, the mechanical royalty rate is 8.5% of what they call PPD, the published price to dealers. So it's basically the wholesale price. So if the PPD is, we'll just make up numbers for ease of, is $10. Of course, and if it was England, it'd be £10. But let's just keep it easy. So $10. So it'd be 85 cents. So if you had 10 songs on that record, each song would be worth 8.5 cents. You just divide it up. If there are 20 songs, you would have 4.25 cents, and so on. But it would cost 85 cents in mechanical royalties. Okay, no matter how many songs you have. In the U.S., it's a per song payout. So here, I think the mechanical rate at the moment, I'm gonna get this wrong, is 8.25 cents, I believe. So if you have 10 songs, it costs you 82.5 cents. If you have 20 songs, it costs you $1. 82 times 2, so $1.65. So there is no cap. You pay per song. So what the record companies have done is they negotiate in record deals with artists a cap, saying we're only going to pay on 10. So they can control their. But the problem is if you use outside writers who aren't bound by the artist's deal, they can just say, well, we don't care what your deal is. That's not my deal. Or sampling, for example, which is a major thing that people have heard of, but it's widely discussed. It's very rarely understood. When you sample something, everybody out there who's ever heard any urban music, for example, has heard a song that has a beat from somebody else. That's a sample. You have no right to use that. You got to get permission to use that. So let's say your record deal has a cap in it that the record company has negotiated and you agreed to because you don't have much of a choice. But you want to go use this outside song. Well, that outside writer or publisher who may control the rights to that song may say, well, we're not going to agree to the cap. You pay us 100%. You pay us at 8.25. Okay? So if you had an album full of sampled material, you could actually go over your cap and end up costing you money, and then they'll collateralize that excess against the rest of your income. So it gets very complicated, and as I tell any new client who says, oh, well, we had this other lawyer once who did this contract for us. Oh, how'd you find him? Well, he was a friend of the family. He did real estate. I said, listen, I don't give tax advice. I don't write wills. If you hire me to be your criminal lawyer, you're going to end up in jail. Because I don't know anything about it. You got to hire a specialist in any business, and certainly in the record business, because it is complicated. I can't remember if my good friend Michael Reinert's Universal Music Group recording deal is now 90 pages long or more. But there's serious, significant contracts, which each paragraph is tailor-made to give you a hard time. So that's what I meant by the cap. When you negotiate a record deal, there's a number of issues that you contend with, from how many albums you're going to grant the record label, how many options. I had mentioned earlier that a typical U.S. deal might be a 6 or 7, maybe even an 8 album deal. And those options are always in favor of the label, meaning that we're going to put out this album. If we like it, we'll have the option to pick up another. If you do like that, we have the option to pick up another, and so on. And that's a fight. Obviously, as the artist, you want the least amount of albums possible. Why? You think, intuitively, you might think the opposite. Oh, if they gave me an 8 album deal, they must really like me. Well, no. They're just trying to, have you for as long as possible. The shorter the deal, if you have success, the better it is for you. Why? Because you can renegotiate. If I have a 3 album deal and album 1, 2, and 3 do amazing, guess what? I'm a free agent now. Just think sports. If they want to get me, they got to sign me, and I can set my price. And when I negotiated my original deal, when I was a nobody and I had my demo tape and I was thankful that I was meeting anybody, obviously you didn't have the same ability, or typically you wouldn't have had the same, stature or success to demand the kind of things that you might be able to get in renegotiation. So options, for example, one of those. Tour support, for example, is something that, although is less important to some extent in urban music deals, because touring isn't really a promotional tool. It's more of a money-making tool for the artists. Urban shows, to those of viewers out there who have seen them, there's a couple good acts out there, but they're late-night kind of club, club dates. Whereas in the old days, you had rock acts out on the road. If you're doing a rock deal, for example, you're going to want what we call tour support. And typically, what the label will agree to is what we call deficit tour support. And what does that mean? If your tour is, let's say, a 2-month tour, and you're going to do, let's say that's 60 days, let's say you do 45 dates, I'm just making this up, and you're going to draw in, again with easy numbers, $100,000 over the 45 dates, but it's going to cost you $140,000 to be on the road, they'll pick up the 40 grand. They're not going to say, here's 140, go keep your 100. That's the deficit. You're going to make 100, we'll pick up, and out of that 40, you'll then negotiate with the label that only part of that will be recoupable, which brings me to the magic of record deals, the concept of recoupability. What does that mean? I oftentimes get amused when I read in the broadsheets or the regular non-industry press, people analyzing, or on the news channels, how much somebody's record deal is worth. Typically what they do is they add up all of if every option were to be picked up at the maximum amount, add them all up, that's what my deal was worth. Well, that's really not accurate. Deals are worth whatever actually gets picked up and paid for, and so forth. The way that record companies organize their books, which has always been controversial, is that any time that they spend money on you, you got to pay it back. You don't have to pay it back out of your pocket as if it's a loan, like, hey, where's my $50 I loaned you last week? No, but out of the money you earned, your royalty income. Remember I gave you the Beatles example. If I'm getting, let's say, $1.50 a record, if they spend $100,000 on me, every $1.50 goes to pay back that $100,000. That's what we call recoupment. Now, the mechanical royalties typically are not subject to the recoupment. So you have the 2 sets of royalties. One will go to recoup, one won't. If you do have them recouped, that's what they call cross-collateralized. So don't ever let your deal be crossed. Otherwise, you're in big trouble. Especially if there's samples, because then you're going to end up really irritating somebody. We're getting in a lawsuit probably, moreover. But the idea of recoupability brings up a lot of issues that artists are historically irritated over. You would think that once you've paid back out of your earnings the amount that they've spent on recording you, promoting you, and so forth, that you'd own your masters. Well, we paid you back. Well, that's not at all how it works. They still own the masters, unless you are a very, very big artist with a huge amount of juice. The record company's going to own the masters. So the ownership of the masters will typically sit with the record company. whereas the ownership of the underlying songs will stay with the writers. So, if you're in a band and you play drums and you don't write anything, you don't own anything. You own possibly a piece of income that you've had a band deal with your mates on, but the record company owns the masters. You didn't write any of the songs, so you don't own any of that. You'll end up having a revenue stream. Which brings me to a point about how you live as a musician. There was a Washington Post article that I read a couple of years ago. I thought it was a terrific article. And the quote that I always repeat in meetings is, your average rock star earns less than a school teacher. Bono doesn't. Give me a name of a band. Quick.
Guns N' Roses.
Guns N' Roses. Well,
Usher.
that's old.
Yeah, I know.
Usher.
New. Huh?
Usher.
Well, Usher, obviously, Usher doesn't. R. Kelly doesn't. Brandy doesn't. These, big successful, obviously. But your average rock act, the bass player or the drummer, or, well, Fish has a pretty active touring schedule. But point is this: is that it's not necessarily the road to riches. For every one success, there's 9 failures, or 10 failures, whatever the number is. That's where, when you're negotiating a deal, from my point of view, for every Madonna, there's 10 Madonna wannabes. Just happens to rhyme. That sounded good. But who have failed, who the labels have spent $1 million on. So, when she goes in and says, hey, I've earned you all this money, I got you. Well, that's part of, they can't just say, well, all right, fine, we'll give you 90% of it. We'll keep 10. Thank you for being Madonna. Well, they need to. I'm not sure what her deal is. Thanks. Sorry, Madonna. But there is a point where, the labels have to make an economic, the economics of the record business do come into play. And as much as they may seem unsavory to the unsophisticated, garage dude or rapper who doesn't, feels like he's the next big thing, there is a side of it. Although I am, a lawyer for artists, so oftentimes that, does make sense. And artists really need to, I feel, and those of you out there who are getting into negotiating record deals should really understand the realities, because it's not morality and what's right really has nothing to do in the record business. It's how it's done, and knowing where you can push and knowing where you can't push, because it's not about, well, you shouldn't have 8 albums, why should you have? Listen, if you got nowhere else to go, get on your knees and thank them for signing you. If you have competition, then by all means try to get it down to a 1 album deal. But there is a reality out there that a lot of people fail to appreciate. Record deals and publishing deals are usually done in this order. A publisher will want typically to bet on the writer whose record deal they've heard about, who they think is going to be a big success. Because at the very least, the publisher can collect the mechanical royalties, and those mechanical royalties will go back to also recoup the advance that the publishers made. So typically you'll have your record deal first and your publishing deal second. So they're not simultaneously, therefore if one's first, one's second, that's not simultaneously, but they typically happen close in time. When they happen and how close in time is part of the magic. Because if you have your record deal signed and there's a nice buzz on it, well, you can get a pretty good advance. I can go around and say, all right, I can get you this and many hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can also say, well, you know what, let's wait until this thing starts happening at radio, because then they'll be more excited. They can see how big my record is, because the bigger the record is, the more the record company's going to ship, the more they ship, the more they're going to sell, the more they're going to sell, the more mechanical royalties, the bigger the publishing deal. That was fast. But that's how what happens sometimes is people have egos. We are talking about the creative world. And guess what? That record goes out, flops. So what I could have got him yesterday, before we knew what really was going to happen, is now half of what it was, because it didn't perform. And now the publisher is going to say, well, you shipped 500,000, you sold 40,000. So we only project you're going to sell 250,000. Therefore, here's the math, and blah blah blah. Here's your little check now. Versus, so the timing of when you do your publishing deal it's an art, not a science, and it's one that, as a lawyer, the hardest thing in all of show business as a representative is you have to be the honest guy. You got to say, not sure that's going to sell that many records, and it's very hard to do. but you're giving business advice. And if you sit back and say, you got to go triple platinum, let's wait. And the old saying, do we ship platinum at return tin, meaning that they're sold tin, meaning that you didn't do anything which we thought was going to do great. That will affect the value of a deal, and that's part of the advice-giving process that you will be judged on and paid for, or not. What we do at the point when somebody comes in with a project that they feel is ready to go, it's the market has changed, as I was indicating, in a couple of ways. The most significant is, in my opinion, and some of my A&R friends out there, Bruce, don't be mad at me, will be, it's not so much, hey, I got this great act, you need to listen to this. There's still some of that. Still a lot of that. But it's more this. Hey, I represent this label out of Memphis. They have 400 spins, BDS. They did a deal with Selecto Hits. They've sold 10,000 units. They're opening up for Nelly. The crowd response is great. There's a great street buzz. You need these guys. And what that all adds up to is going to the label saying, hey, we have something. We've taken some of the risk away from the process for you. Okay, we recognize budgets are smaller now. There's less slots. If you get fired, there's not 5 other labels to go to. So we're basically trying to present to the labels as much as we can by way of research, success. Look, we're not going to bring in platinum acts. I mean, obviously, then we don't need the label if we're already selling platinum. But enough where we can illustrate, empirically and objectively, the fact that this group has what it takes. Not because I think they sound good. I'm a white lawyer. What do I know about picking a hip-hop track? I don't know. You're asking me if I like your record? Trust me, I like you. I'll make a good deal for you. Kidding aside, I'll take a look at people's business and what they've done, and say, okay, I believe that was very smart. You got a good, here. Let's look at the sound scans. Here's your BDS. That looks nice. What's your fan base like? Let's see your contracts. You got all your artists signed up. Terrific. And then I walk into friends of mine's offices who are the label presidents or the senior VPs of A&R or whoever they happen to may be and say, here's what we got. You need this thing. And you know what? I may not even get why the record's good. So, which is not to say I don't believe in it, but it's not the point of it. The point is that there's a there's music business. The artists do the music, we do the business. So you can't have one without the other, but it's not my job to select the single or to say, well, I think you should style yourself this way. I mean, we have to be real about, as lawyers, what we're asked to do. And it is unique, and this is a distinction between Europe and America I can make. Lawyers in America, music lawyers in America, are very proactive. We shop stuff. I'm out there saying, you need this is what you got. But the approach, again, is as I explained it. It's not so much about... Now, there are times when people will come in and say, and I'll say, wow, that's a hot song. And I'll call up and say, you got to hear this thing. My God, you got to sign this. But usually it's about, I just got off a conference call before you came in with a new label. They've sold 20,000 units on their own. That they have radio in the Northeast. And their package is ready to go. I said, okay, come on in. Here's, next Tuesday, whatever time the meeting is, we'll sit down after Thanksgiving. I'll make the rounds of that. Because that is something that I can walk into at any level. And if all of my friends pass, there's no embarrassment for me. I mean, it's not like I wasted their time, or they're like, oh, no, Jay's calling us for another band he found. But these are actual, and that's really what the executives are looking for, in my opinion. It's different in Britain because it's just such a smaller market that it's harder to get radio without really being signed to a major. Urban music isn't really relevant over there as much as it is here. It's relevant like this. I work with an artist called The Game. Okay, The Game is massive. So when he goes over there, they love him. Or Jay-Z, or Puffy goes over, or whoever. But if you're a mid-level artist here who maybe has sold a couple 100,000 records, who you have a big fan base, they won't even put your record out over there. I mean, it's not like, it's just not worth it. Britain is more guitar oriented. We represent an act out of Ireland called the Thrills, signed to Virgin. They've sold a couple million records. There's a new group also called from Ireland called Humanzy. And these are the kind of bands where it is going to the clubs. It is that. So I have a staff now, because I'm old and too tired, who goes out, and then when there's a buzz, then I'll show up. You see, now that's if you get to be senior enough, you get to stay home at 9 o'clock at night. But so it's different to the extent that what gets signed over there is different than what gets signed here. So therefore, you have the old rock and roll. What's the buzz in the band? Boy, they drew a lot, at this particular club on this night, and so heard them, and so wants to produce their, So it's in some ways genre driven why the deal making is different, if you ask me. We deal with tons of music publishing contracts every day, just as many music publishing contracts as recording agreements.
And are they very different?
They're a completely different set of rights. Absolutely very different. On the one hand, a recording agreement, you're signing as a recording artist. The drummer says, I'm going to only drum for you, or the rapper says, I'm only going to rap for you, or the guitar player says, etc. The publishing deals are for the songwriters. There are publishing deals with writers who you've never even heard of before, who don't perform, who just write. And they may have written the last Britney Spears hit, or the next Nelly song, or whatever. Although I should, most rappers do write their own rhymes, so I shouldn't have. Sorry, Nelly, I didn't mean that to indicate you weren't writing your rhymes. But the point is that you have a complete different set of rights. It's not about performing. It's about owning the copyright in the underlying musical composition that will end up being performed and recorded. You have two separate copyrights in the world of music. You have the copyright in the master, and the copyright in the song itself. Just like we used back in our Beatles example. If I go in and record my Beatles song, I own that master. Those are my recordings. That's my copyright. It's not Lennon's estate, and it's my recordings. I own that copyright. But the underlying composition, when I sing Yesterday, or whatever song my horrible voice could eke out, that is owned by the estate of in this case Lennon, or the person whether they're alive. So you have those separate copyrights. Therefore, the deals deal with completely separate things. I mean, of course, they're interrelated, because what good is a song if you're not recording it? What good is a record if you can't have there's no songs to record? So, of course, they're related, so there's similar verbiage, but the deals are really quite distinct. And just because you know how to do one does not mean you know how to do another one. One thing that's happening generally in the world of music is because of the shrinkage of the market, and it's not just because everybody's stealing songs, which is a big problem, and it's not funny. It's wrong. My 14-year-old cousin Matthew, I recently said, "What's your favorite record?" He goes, "I don't know, whatever I can steal off the internet." So when I got done punching him, that's so there is that. But you know what? That's a young kid. But you also have the teenage, the 14 to 25 age group, the target for records. Now you got Game Boys, you got videos, there's just so many other things to buy. There's the lifestyle. You want that pair of sneakers. Look, when I was 14 years old, the pair of sneakers cost $9. Now they cost $90. So it's the amount of money that parents have to spend on the discretionary entertainment dollar is stretched. So it's not surprising that kids still. It's not that people don't want music anymore. It's what am I going to choose? And if I can get it for free, or if I could just buy the 1.99 iPod song, all right, I can be a happening teenage kid with an iPod with a couple songs and a pair of sneakers and a Game Boy and and the cool hat with what's the cool brand now? But so what record labels are doing, and what entertainment companies are doing, because the labels are typically owned by larger, are doing things like the ringtones, the voice tones. The artists themselves are understanding how they need to branch out and brand themselves. Davenport Lyons probably has one of the biggest in Europe branding practices. We do everybody's European brands, from Fat Farm to Woo Wear to Echo to I mean, there's a list like this, and those rights are held separately by the artist, because when you do a record deal, they're not necessarily, now labels now are trying to get in on the merchandising, and artists are saying no. So that's a struggle now, where it used to just be no label really, every label wants merchandising, but you say, all right, we'll ask for it, but we'll give it away. So there's those ancillary parts of the business that are really proving to be profit centers. Puffy is the greatest example. Whether you like him or you don't like him, happens to be somebody I like. I do a lot of business with his label, but Sean John has earned a massive amount of money. Bad Boy Records, still a big success. His publishing company makes loads of money. He still sells his own records. I mean, so that's kind of a business plan. Jay-Z is now the head of Def Jam. Who's so he's a senior executive running one of the world's greatest urban rock urban record labels ever, and he's a rapper. So you have this branching out of revenue streams and a real focus and real. It's no longer something novel to do. It's essential. You asked about other deals like publishing deals and so forth. If you write your music, which not everybody does, then you can go into a music publisher and do a deal whereby they'll collect those mechanical royalties for you and share in the income and help place your songs for TV, radio, TV, film, and so forth, advertisements, and help you earn beyond just what you would have earned anyway, and you can get advances from those publishers. So if you're a songwriter, now again, let's go back to the rock band example. If there's 4 guys in a band, let's think of what's a band these days? Led Zeppelin. I'm going to use Led Zeppelin as a band. Okay, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant. Those guys earned the music publishing income. Bonham and Jones didn't. They didn't write. Or look at the Beatles. Lennon McCartney. How many songs did George write? Ringo, I think he had Octopus's Garden, and that was it. I love Ringo though. But so the people, the band members who write are really the only ones who have earnings in the music publishing world. So it's not. Again, there's a lot of ideas out there that people think they have, or that they do have, that just aren't based in the full breadth of knowledge. So songwriters are really the only ones that have the ability to earn from music publishing. I think one thing that has certainly influenced how music is being sold and how deals are being made is, what's happening with digital. I represent one of the bigger, I should say, independent labels that I've been general counsel for I don't know, 10 years or something like that. And we had an entire, day of meetings about, what are we going to do in the digital space that we already haven't done. We're already in the digital space, but it's every day there's something new that's happening. It's almost, needing the crystal ball. We have a deal with iTunes. We have a deal with all the majors. We have a deal with with Yahoo. We have a deal with every possible. I remember about 2 years ago, I started in vain to insist in record deals that there was a 18-month holdback period before any of my artists' singles could be put and made available for sales as singles digitally. Because although in popular music today, and let's go back 5 years before digital, well, I don't know how many years, but it's just pre-digital, your single really was just your video. You didn't go buy a single. There wasn't really a singles market. In Europe, there was a singles market. In America, when's the last time anybody watching this tape, forget if you can even remember when you bought CDs, bought a single? Hardly ever. The single was the video. What's your single? It's the song they worked the radio, it's the song they produced the video for, and that was the single that sold the album. There wasn't necessarily a single that you bought. So I said, well, so it was never a problem before. So I said, well, it's going to turn out where you're going to just be able to buy and pick and choose and cherry pick. And if you got 18 songs in a record and you only like 3 of them, well, you can buy 3. Well, that's not good for the artist, because guess what? You're making $3 instead of $18.98. So, and I joked when I said in vain, because everybody said no. Every single record club said, absolutely not, Jay. We're not doing that. Nobody's getting that. You're not getting it. Yelling and screaming. Okay. Sure enough, iTunes. Here we are, 3 years later, from my first my magic 8-ball. It will not all be good. And artists are losing money. Back when I was a kid buying records in the 1920s, you bought an album. You could buy singles back then. But you bought the single because you wanted to get excited about the album. Now, because there's just so much, the music landscape has just changed so dramatically digitally that you're just really buying. You're not necessarily having that same experience, the visual experience, the liner notes, just the physicality of it all is changing. So, that's the downside. The upside is, there is some degree of replacement. So people are buying again. You bought on vinyl, then you bought on cassette, then you bought on CD. Now you're buying on for your iPod. So that's buying the same thing 4 times, and not a bad business if you can get in it. But it's not the same because you can get stuff for free. There are new technologies always coming out. I know EMI has some new technology that they're introducing that's going to help their label, their recordings through their label releases, limit the number of copies you can make, so forth. And kids don't understand it because they're growing up not thinking that you have to buy records. You just get records. It's like listening to the radio. I just put on my disc. It doesn't seem much different. And obviously, being that it's digital, the copies are they're like first generation copies. I mean, back in the old days, everybody said the cassettes were going to be the end of the music business. Well, when's the last time if any of us have cassettes out there? When you transferred from vinyl to cassette, it didn't sound very good, did it? So it didn't really dilute the market share, the marketplace for album buying, whereby digital copies really do impact that. However, with that comes the ability to sell ringtones and voice tones and video games, all these digital kind of generated, and the world of entertainment is just it's all going to a place where there's not going to be this is going to be your stereo, and you'll have it'll sound better than the thing that took up half your dorm room. It really will, and that's a good thing ultimately. One thing that's interesting in dealing with in being a music lawyer or an entertainment lawyer is the different types of personalities. In music, for example, or specifically, that's what this tape is about. This program is about. There's any number of categories of people, but there's 3, for example, that are worthy of talking about. One would be the manager, one would be the artist, one would be the record label. And in negotiating a record deal, let's say, your communications are completely different with all those 3 individuals. Let's go from the hardest to the other hardest. Dealing with the artist is very hard because artists are typically the worst business people going. Not because they're not smart, but because that's not where they focus. Now, Mick Jagger has a master's degree from the London School of Economics, and there's a lot of wonderful urban artists. So I know Puffy's got an empire. My friend Jimmy Roseman has a great brand company, Czar Entertainment, that's got all kinds of management and so there's a lot of sophisticated people out there. But your typical artist doesn't want to be told that he's only getting X amount of dollars, or they're not going to give you the tour, the big bus that you want, or you're not going to get to all fly first class, or so the way the communication skills and the challenges in that dialogue are vastly different. You need to recognize the sensitivity. They're artists in the true sense of the word, and they're selling art. Forget records for a second. Let's say you're a painter. You're saying, do you like my painting? Well, the answer is no. What do you tell the guy? They don't like your painting. Well, that's personal. You painted the damn thing. Did you like, so it's a difficult thing because it's no different than a painting or, do you like my architecture? Do you like my poem? This is my song, it's a rejection business. I represent a lot of fashion models, and there's a lot of beautiful women out there. But you know what? If you're not the look they're looking for, they've rejected how you look. So it's very personal. if I'm a schmuck lawyer. If I get, if somebody doesn't like me, it's the worst thing. There's another guy they like, but it's not my, lawyering. Maybe it's my lawyering skills. It's not my humanity, my expression that they. So it's a very, very sensitive. But the trick is, and there's a line from one of the Godfather movies. Of course, I'm stereotypically Italian, so I have to slide that in. Where I can't remember who said it, but it's always tell bad news immediately. I think Tom Hayden said it. You always tell bad news immediately. So I've always stuck by that as a rule. And when somebody says no, I always call the artist. I hate to tell you, but the project's been passed on. And I feel like if you just go to to the artist straight on that, it's a much better way because everybody's dream. Because you don't know what dream leads to what verbal comment to what person and who's dynamic, and everybody gets then psychiatrists make money. Let's just go there. So it's a little bit of eggshell walking, but you have to be honest, and hopefully by the time you're in those difficult conversations, you've educated the artist enough to know where to. How to gauge his expectations. Managers are really the babysitters of the artists in the most professional sense, and I don't mean that to be a bad thing, but a good thing. They're the day-to-day people. I don't need to speak to the artist every day. No reason for me to speak to an artist every day. I don't have the time to speak to an artist every day. I have hundreds of clients. Managers have a few. When I speak to the managers, they get the real story. All right, the song is tanking at radio. They think the album cover sucks. The second single is not going to happen. We can't get so and so to clear the remix, and then this thing isn't going to. This isn't going to happen. You need to come up with something better because otherwise this thing's going to fall through. So that's how I'll talk to the manager because the manager's a professional. Now, usually, I can get to the manager to be the one to have the hard conversation with the artist. But at the end of the day, in a business sense, I always describe the artist. If you did a wheel and spokes, we're the hub. Managers, accountants, labels, A&Rs, publicists. At the end of the day, I'm the one that has to fire everybody else. I'm the one that has to say, all right, what'd you do on this thing? So we do have a different responsibility. But dealing with the managers, they're the business guys who have that day-to-day relationship with who will maybe know the better time to speak to the artist or whatever. Speaking to the labels is and that's the hardcore business deal. So dealing with label presidents, dealing with the business affairs individuals, dealing with the A&R guys, all different dynamics. But they all revolve around the common kind of thing, which is you're selling a product, you're making a deal, okay? It could be I'm selling milk to the Dairy Association, saying we got the best milk. It's just, it's a business deal, so it could be anything in a way. But it's selling art and it's selling product and it's music and there's a whole, like we talked about throughout this interview. But it is over understanding what they're up against, knowing where the lies are, knowing where I shouldn't say lies, knowing where the tactics are, how they're going to be presented, knowing what they're going to say, knowing what you have to do to overcome it, and knowing where the limits are. If I walk into a negotiation and I have no other offers on the table, I got to make, if this deal falls through, this artist who thinks he's getting signed doesn't have a deal. If there's 5 other labels out there, I can talk a certain way to my friends at the labels and say, hey, this is what I want, blah, 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 blah. Otherwise, we're going to go over here. All right, well, we need this record, Jay. Let us have it. Then you can have that. So it depends. The dynamic there is, in the truest sense, hard-nosed negotiating because there's only a few guys, and it becomes very difficult. The hardest part, if you ask me, other lawyers might disagree or have a different viewpoint, but I have what I think to be pretty good relationships with most of the label presidents and most of the senior business affairs guys. the deal makers, the ones who really say yes or no. So when I have to say no to somebody, I'm saying no to my friend. In fact, one of the deals I did a few years ago, one of my very best friends in the business, I had to turn him down. Now, I didn't turn him down. The artist wanted to be at another label. And so somebody who I go on vacation with, who our mothers know each other, I can't have the deal. So so there is that dynamic because of the very small, tight-knit, community. That's where that dynamic takes place. So you have all these very kind of stressed out, because it's a small, personal relationship, vibe-driven business. It's not selling concrete to the highest bidder who's going to, to Halliburton, who's going to build roads in Iraq. That's easy. Whoever's the highest bidder gets it. Don't get in the industry. Is my advice to students. Kidding aside, listen, you always follow your dreams. No matter what I say, or what your mother says, or what your school teacher says, or what if it's something you have a passion for, pursue it. I mean, whether it's to be a music lawyer, or to save the rainforest, or to be a lobbyist. I mean, whatever you have a passion for, it's very difficult. And recognize that there are very few jobs. You need to be in New York and L.A. or Nashville. I mean, I have no country music clients. So actually, I shouldn't say that. I have very few country music clients. But you need to be, or in my case, London. You need to be where it's at. You're not going to be a successful music lawyer if you live in Omaha. Law students will typically try to get those summer intern jobs at the high-paying firms so they can get to the next, You're better off, you want to be a music lawyer, to come to New York and work for free and waitress at night or waiter at night while you work as an intern in the mailroom at William Morris or at Atlantic Records, or, really, you got to really pay your dues. You just got to get in and know people. It's very hard. There's very few slots. And if you have no connections and you can't get that, you need to be in an area where music is happening. Look, music happens in other cities besides New York, L.A., and Nashville. Let's face it, it happens every garage in every city in the United States. But, it's to be able to, do your research, figure out, or team up with somebody and say, hey, I don't know how to do this, but this band is great. And I got your name through so-and-so, would you help me do this thing? Or you represent them and, let me watch. You need to somehow get involved. And there's no, I don't know that any law school, NYU or Loyola or whatever has, and I could be wrong, can really, unless they have a specific relationship with the Warner Music Group or EMI Records or Universal Music Group or something like that, it really is difficult. But it's to learn the people. If you don't know, if you can't name the 5 major label presidents, or then let's start there. What are can you name the 5 major labels? You can name some car manufacturers. I'm sure where you buy your gas, but is Virgin Records part of EMI or Warner? If you don't know that, figure it out. EMI is the answer, by the way. So the point is get yourself to at least know what you're talking about, know who the players are, and just try to get in. Offer to intern at somebody's office in some place, and even if it's not a law job, it's not easy. It's not an easy nut to crack.